"If we don't stay close, we'll freeze," she said. The rancher knew he had no choice. The blizzard hit like a freight train at midnight. Jack Miller felt his horse stumble beneath him as snow blasted sideways across the Montana wilderness. He'd been tracking the missing cattle for 6 hours, and now he was paying the price. The temperature had dropped 40 degrees in 20 minutes, and visibility was down to nothing. Through the howling wind, he heard a scream. Jack yanked the reins hard, steering his mare toward the sound. His fingers were already going numb inside his gloves. Another scream cut through the storm, closer this time. He jumped down from his horse, boots sinking into 2 feet of fresh powder, and pushed forward through the white wall. A figure stumbled into him, nearly knocking them both down. It was a woman, her face red from cold, her jacket torn open. She grabbed his arm with desperate strength. "My truck went off the road," she gasped. "I've been walking for an hour. I can't feel my legs." Jack didn't waste time with questions. He pulled her toward his horse, practically lifting her into the saddle. The mare was strong, but carrying 2 people through a blizzard would test her limits. He climbed up behind the woman, wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her steady. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles northeast," he shouted over the wind. "We won't make it back to my ranch." The woman nodded, her teeth chattering too hard to speak. Jack kicked the mare forward, trusting the animal's instincts more than his own failing vision. The cold was brutal now, cutting through his heavy coat like it was made of paper. He could feel the woman shaking against him, her body starting to shut down. 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours passed before Jack spotted the dark shape of the line shack emerging from the storm. The small wooden structure was barely standing, but it had 4 walls and a roof. That was enough. He half-carried the woman inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The shack offered shelter from the wind, but it was nearly as cold inside as out. No fire had burned here in months, maybe years. "We need heat," the woman managed to say through chattering teeth. "Now." Jack moved fast. He found the old potbelly stove in the corner and thanked whatever gods were listening that someone had left kindling and split wood stacked beside it. His fingers fumbled with matches, the cold making every movement clumsy. On the 3rd try, a flame caught. The woman had collapsed onto the floor, curled into a ball. Jack got the fire going and turned to her. She wasn't shaking anymore, which was a bad sign. When the body stopped shivering, it meant hypothermia was setting in deep. "What's your name?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Claire," she whispered. "Claire Watson." "I'm Jack. We need to get you warm, Claire. Can you move closer to the stove?" She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. Jack caught her and dragged an old bench closer to the growing fire. He helped her onto it, then looked around the shack. There was a dusty wool blanket hanging on the wall and an old canvas tarp in the corner. Not much, but it would have to work. The wind screamed outside, shaking the walls. Snow was already piling against the door. They weren't going anywhere until the storm passed, and from the sound of it, that wouldn't be any time soon. Claire's lips were turning blue. Jack wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, but she pushed it away weakly. Not enough," she said. Her voice was fading. "I am so cold. I can't get warm." Jack fed more wood into the stove, but the fire was still small, barely taking the edge off the freezing air. The shack's walls had gaps where the wind whistled through. Heat was escaping as fast as the fire could produce it. Claire's eyes met his, and he saw real fear there. "If we don't stay close, we'll freeze," she said. Jack understood what she meant. He'd seen hypothermia before, knew how fast it could kill. Body heat was sometimes the only thing that could bring someone back from the edge. He nodded and sat beside her on the bench, pulling the blanket around both of them. Even through their clothes, he could feel how cold she was. It was like sitting next to a block of ice. Claire pressed against him, seeking any warmth she could find. Jack wrapped his arms around her, trying to share what little heat his body still held. The fire crackled and grew stronger, but it wasn't enough. The storm outside was too fierce, the cold too deep. Jack could feel his own body temperature dropping despite his heavy coat and layers. If they both went into hypothermia, neither of them would make it out alive. "Tell me about your ranch," Claire said suddenly, her voice barely audible. "Keep talking, stay awake." Jack knew what she was doing. Sleep was the enemy now. Once you fell asleep in the cold, you might never wake up. The hours crawled past, like wounded animals. Jack kept the fire burning, kept talking, kept holding Claire close as the blizzard raged outside. Their survival depended on staying conscious, staying warm, and staying together. The rancher knew he had no choice. They would make it through this night, or they wouldn't see morning. Jack fed another log into the stove, watching sparks spiral up. Claire had stopped talking 10 minutes ago, and that worried him more than anything. He shifted on the bench, adjusting the blanket around them both. Her breathing was shallow, too quiet. "Claire, stay with me," he said, giving her a gentle shake. Her eyes fluttered open. They looked glassy, unfocused. Jack had seen that look before on cattle caught in winter storms. It meant time was running out. "I need you to move," he told her. "We have to keep your blood flowing." She tried to respond, but only managed a weak nod. Jack stood, pulling her up with him. She could barely support her own weight. He walked her in slow circles around the small shack, one arm locked around her waist. Each step was a struggle, but he kept them moving. "My truck," Claire mumbled. "I was driving from Billings, my sister's wedding. Have to get there." "You'll make it," Jack said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "Storm will pass. We'll get you to that wedding." "You don't understand." Her words were slurred now. "I'm the maid of honor. Jenny will kill me if I miss it." Jack almost smiled. If she was worried about her sister's wedding, some part of her was still fighting. That was good. That was what he needed. They completed another circuit of the shack. The fire was burning hot now, but the heat seemed to vanish into the walls and floor, swallowed by the relentless cold seeping in from outside. Jack could hear the wind screaming like something alive, battering against the wood.
"Tell me about your ranch," Claire said again, her voice a little stronger.
"Please. I need to think about something else." Jack guided her back to the bench, sitting close. Miller Ranch. "My grandfather built it in 1942. 3,000 acres of the most stubborn land in Montana. We run cattle, mostly Herefords. Got about 500 head. Sounds lonely," Claire said. "It can be. My wife left 3 years ago. Said she couldn't take the isolation anymore. Packed up and moved to Seattle." Jack hadn't meant to share that, but the words came out anyway. "Something about facing death made people honest. I'm sorry. Don't be." She wasn't wrong. Ranch life isn't for everyone.
He pulled the blanket tighter around them.
"What about you? What do you do in Billings?" "I'm a veterinarian. Large animals mostly. Horses, cattle." Claire's teeth were still chattering, but she seemed more alert. "Started my own practice 2 years ago." Jack raised an eyebrow. "A vet? You any good?" "The best." She managed a weak smile. "Though I specialize in keeping animals alive. Not myself, apparently. You're doing fine. We both are." Jack stood again, checking the wood supply. They had enough to last through the night if they were careful. Maybe into tomorrow morning. But the storm showed no signs of letting up. He moved to the small window, scraping away the frost that had formed on the inside of the glass. Outside was nothing but white chaos. Snow was piling up against the shack's walls at an alarming rate. The door was already blocked halfway up. If this kept going, they'd be completely buried by dawn. A loud crack split the air, and the whole shack shuddered. Jack spun around. A branch from the ancient cottonwood tree outside had broken under the weight of ice and snow, slamming into the roof. He looked up at the ceiling, watching for damage. A thin line of snow began trickling through a new gap in the boards. "That's not good," Claire said. "No, it's not." Jack grabbed the canvas tarp and used the bench to reach the ceiling. He stuffed the tarp into the gap as best he could, but cold air was still getting through. The shack's protection was failing. He jumped down and returned to Claire's side. Her color was slightly better, the fire finally starting to do its job. But Jack knew they weren't out of danger, not even close. The temperature outside had to be well below zero by now, and with the wind chill it was probably lethal within minutes. "Jack," Claire said quietly, "what were you doing out here? Before you found me?" "Looking for missing cattle. 20 head wandered off yesterday. I thought I could round them up before the storm hit." He shook his head. "Stupid move. I should have known better." "You saved my life. That wasn't stupid. Storm's not over yet." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind howl. Another branch cracked somewhere outside, the sound like a gunshot. The fire popped and hissed, fighting to stay alive against the invading cold. Claire suddenly leaned forward, her face twisted in pain. "My feet. I can't feel them at all." Jack knelt down and carefully removed her boots. Her socks were soaked through, partially frozen. He pulled them off, and his stomach dropped. Her toes were white, bloodless. Frostbite was setting in. "We need to warm these up slowly," he said, trying to keep the worry out of his voice. "Too fast and will cause more damage." He wrapped her feet in the driest part of the blanket and held them against his stomach, using his body heat to gradually bring feeling back. Claire gasped, and he knew it hurt. That was actually a good sign. Pain meant the nerves were still working. "Tell me more about your sister," Jack said, trying to distract her. "The one getting married. Jenny. She's younger than me by 4 years. Met her fiancé at a rodeo in Bozeman. He's a bull rider, if you can believe it. Crazy as they come, but he treats her like a queen." Claire's voice was tight with pain. "They've been planning this wedding for 18 months. She picked me as maid of honor the day he proposed. She'll understand why you're late. You don't know Jenny. She's already stressed about everything being perfect. If I don't show up, she'll lose her mind." Claire tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. "I'm supposed to give a speech at the reception. Spent 3 weeks writing it." Jack kept rubbing her feet through the blanket, checking the color every few minutes. Slowly, painfully slowly, pink was returning to her toes. "She'd be okay. Probably." "If they made it through the night, recite it," he said. "What?" "Your speech. Recite it for me. Keep your mind occupied." Claire took a shaky breath and began talking about her sister, about growing up on a small farm outside of Great Falls, about the time Jenny broke her arm falling off a horse and blamed it on Claire for daring her to jump a fence. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, the memories bringing her back from the edge. Jack listened and kept working on her feet and kept feeding the fire. Outside, the blizzard raged on, indifferent to their struggle, but inside the lined shack, 2 strangers were fighting for survival, sharing warmth and stories as the long nights stretched ahead. The fire was burning lower despite Jack's efforts to keep it fed. He looked at the remaining wood pile with growing concern. Maybe enough for 3 more hours. After that, they'd be at the mercy of the cold. Dawn was still hours away. The storm showed no mercy. And the rancher knew the hardest part of the night was yet to come. Jack checked the wood supply again, counting each piece. His estimate had been too generous. 2 hours, maybe less? After that, they'd be burning whatever they could find in the shack. The old bench they were sitting on, the doorframe, anything that would catch fire. Claire had dozed off against his shoulder. He let her sleep for now, knowing she needed rest, but watching carefully for signs she was slipping too deep. Every few minutes he'd jostle her awake, make her respond to a question, then let her drift again. The wind had changed direction, now hammering the north wall of the shack. Snow was forcing its way through gaps in the boards, creating small drifts in the corners. Jack used pieces of his torn shirt to stuff the worst holes, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean with his hands. He thought about his horse, Bella, tied outside. The mare was tough, bred for Montana winters, but no animal could survive this storm for long without shelter. He hoped she'd had the sense to break her tether and find protection in the trees. Losing that horse would be another blow, but at least she'd have a chance. Claire jerked awake suddenly, her eyes wide. What was that? Jack had heard it too. A deep groaning sound like wood under terrible strain. He stood up, scanning the walls and ceiling. The sound came again, louder this time, and he realized with cold dread what it was. The roof was buckling under the weight of accumulated snow. "We need to move," he said, pulling Claire to her feet. "Now." They'd barely taken 2 steps when a section of the ceiling gave way. Snow and broken boards crashed down where they'd been sitting seconds before. The fire scattered, embers flying across the floor. Jack stomped them out while dragging Claire toward the far corner, away from the collapse. Cold air rushed in through the gaping hole above them. The temperature in the shack, which had finally climbed above freezing near the fire, plummeted instantly. Jack looked up at the night sky visible through the opening, snow pouring down like a frozen waterfall. "The stove," Claire said, pointing. The potbelly stove was still standing, but the fire inside had been nearly smothered by snow. A few weak flames flickered, struggling to survive. Jack grabbed the last of the dry kindling and coaxed the fire back to life, but without the intact roof, keeping warm was going to be nearly impossible. He pulled Claire into the corner farthest from the collapse, where part of the roof still held. It wasn't much protection, but it was better than nothing. The blanket was soaked now from the snow, useless for warmth. Jack wrapped his arms around Claire, and she pressed against him, both of them shivering violently. "Tell me honestly," Claire said through chattering teeth. "Are we going to die out here?" Jack wanted to lie, to give her false comfort, but he respected her too much. "I don't know. If the storm doesn't break soon, our chances aren't good." She nodded, accepting the truth. "Thank you for not lying." They huddled together as more snow fell through the broken roof. The fire in the stove was dying again, starved of oxygen and overwhelmed by cold. Jack knew he should get up, should try to fix things, but moving meant losing the precious body heat they were sharing. My ex-wife was right, Jack said suddenly. About the loneliness. I haven't had a real conversation with anyone in months, just me and the cattle and the land. He wasn't sure why he was talking, maybe just to keep them both conscious. You start to forget what it's like having someone to talk to. Is that why you never remarried? Partly. Also because I'm apparently impossible to live with. He managed a grim smile. Sarah told me I loved the ranch more than I loved her. Maybe she was right about that too. Claire was quiet for a moment. I was engaged once, 5 years ago. He was a surgeon in Billings, had his whole life planned out. Big house, 3 kids, country club membership. All I wanted was my veterinary practice and my independence. What happened? I chose the practice. He chose someone who wanted the same things he did. She shivered harder. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right call. Nights like this, dying alone in a frozen shack, kind of makes you question your choices. You're not alone, Jack said, and we're not dying. Not yet. A massive gust of wind shook the entire structure. More of the roof tore away, and now half the shack was exposed to the storm. Snow was everywhere, piling up faster than Jack could have imagined. The stove fire finally gave up, the last ember winking out like a closing eye. The temperature dropped so fast Jack could feel it in his bones. His extremities were going numb again. Claire's lips were turning blue, her skin taking on a waxy appearance. They were running out of time. "Claire, look at me," Jack said urgently. "We have to keep moving. We have to keep our blood flowing." She nodded weakly, but when he tried to pull her to her feet, her legs wouldn't support her weight. Jack caught her as she collapsed, her body feeling heavier than it should. The hypothermia was taking hold again, deeper this time. Jack made a decision. Staying in the shack was death. The roof was gone, the fire was dead, and they had no way to generate heat. Their only chance was to move, to try to reach somewhere better. But where? His ranch was 8 miles away through a blizzard. Claire's truck was somewhere out there, buried in snow and useless even if they could find it. Then he remembered. Old Man Peterson had built a hunting cabin about a mile west of the line shack 20 years ago. Jack had only seen it once, but it was newer, better built, and might still have supplies. A mile in whiteout conditions with an incapacitated woman was nearly impossible, but staying here was definitely impossible. He pulled Claire's boots back onto her feet, lacing them tight. She was barely conscious, her head lolling. Jack got his shoulder under her arm and lifted, taking most of her weight. They staggered to the door, which was now completely blocked by snow. Jack kicked at the drift, once, twice, 3 times, until he'd cleared enough space to squeeze through. The wind hit them like a physical blow, so strong it nearly knocked them back inside. The temperature had to be 30 below, maybe worse. The exposed skin would freeze in seconds. "Hold on to me," Jack shouted over the wind. "Don't let go no matter what." Claire's arms wrapped around his waist in a weak grip. Jack bent his head against the storm and pushed forward, choosing a direction based more on instinct than knowledge. Every step was a battle. The snow was waist-deep in places, deeper where it had drifted. His muscles screamed with effort, his lungs burning from the frigid air. He counted steps, trying to keep track of distance. 20 steps, 50, 100. Claire was dead weight now, unconscious, but still clinging to him through sheer survival instinct. Jack's own vision was starting to blur, ice forming on his eyelashes. 200 steps. 300. He had to be close. Had to be. His legs were giving out, his body shutting down from cold and exhaustion. He took another step and his foot caught on something buried under the snow. He went down hard, Claire falling beside him. For a moment, Jack just lay there, tempted to close his eyes and rest. Just for a minute, just until he caught his breath. The snow was actually warm, comfortable, inviting him to sleep.
No.
That was the cold talking. That was death wearing a gentle mask. He forced his eyes open and saw something dark looming ahead through the snow. A structure. The cabin. He'd found it. Jack crawled forward, dragging Claire with him. The cabin door was unlocked. He shoved it open and pulled them both inside, slamming it shut against the storm. The interior was dark and silent, but it was dry and the roof was intact. Jack fumbled for his lighter, fingers barely responding. On the 4th try, a flame sparked to life. The cabin was small but solid, with a working fireplace and a stack of seasoned wood. There was even a propane camping stove on a small table and sleeping bags rolled up in the corner. He got a fire going in the fireplace, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped the lighter 3 times. But finally, blessedly, flames caught and spread. Real heat began filling the space. Jack turned to Claire. She wasn't moving, wasn't responding. Her breathing was so shallow he could barely detect it. He pulled her close to the fire and stripped off her wet outer clothes, wrapping her in both sleeping bags. Then he climbed in beside her, holding her tight, willing his body heat into hers. "Come on, Claire," he whispered. "Stay with me. You've got a wedding to get to, remember? Your sister needs you." He kept talking, kept holding her, kept the fire burning bright. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the cabin, 2 people fought their way back from the edge of oblivion, sharing warmth and stubborn determination to see another sunrise. The rancher had made his choice, and he wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. Claire's eyes opened slowly, focusing on Jack's face inches from hers. For a moment she looked confused, then memory flooded back and she gasped. "We made it," she whispered. "We made it," Jack confirmed. Relief washed over him so powerfully he felt dizzy. "How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by a herd of cattle." She tried to smile. "But alive. Definitely alive." Jack carefully extracted himself from the sleeping bags and added more wood to the fire. The cabin was warming up nicely, reaching a temperature that felt almost tropical compared to what they'd endured. He found candles on a shelf and lit them, providing more light. "Someone uses this place regularly," he said, looking around. "There's canned food, bottled water, medical supplies." Claire sat up slowly, testing her limbs. "My feet hurt like hell." "That's a good sign." "Means the circulation is coming back?" Jack helped her move closer to the fire. "We'll need to check for frostbite damage once you warm her, but I think you'll keep all your toes." She laughed, a sound that held an edge of hysteria. "That's the best news I've heard all night. I'm rather attached to my toes." Jack found a pot and melted snow for water, heating it on the propane stove. He made weak tea from ancient tea bags he discovered in a tin, and they sipped the warm liquid gratefully. The simple act of drinking something hot felt miraculous. "What time is it?" Claire asked. Jack checked his watch, surprised it was still working. 4:30 in the morning. Storm's still going, but it sounds like it's letting up a bit. The wedding is at 2 this afternoon in Helena. That's a 5-hour drive from here on good roads." Claire's face fell. "I'm not going to make it." "Maybe not on time," Jack said, "but we'll get you there. Once the storm clears, we'll figure something out." They sat in companionable silence, watching the fire. The cabin creaked and groaned around them as wind continued to batter it, but the structure held firm. Jack felt exhaustion pulling at him now that the immediate danger had passed, but he forced himself to stay alert. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said after a while. "Sure. Why did you risk your life for me? You don't know me." "You could have kept riding, saved yourself." Jack considered the question. "I was raised to believe you help people when they need it. No calculations, no conditions. Someone needs help, you give it. End of story. That's becoming a rare quality in this world. Maybe. Or maybe people just don't get as many chances to prove it." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Out here, we take care of each other because we have to. City folks have 911 ambulances. We've got neighbors and whatever courage we can muster." Claire studied him in the firelight. "Your ex-wife was wrong, you know, about the loneliness thing. You're not lonely because you love the ranch too much. You're lonely because you give too much of yourself away." Jack felt something twist in his chest. That's a pretty bold statement from someone who almost froze to death rather than accept help gracefully. "I accepted help. I just fought against needing it first." She smiled. "We might have more in common than you think." Outside, the wind was definitely dropping. The howling fury that had defined the night was fading to a steady blow. Dawn was coming, and with it, hopefully, the end of the storm. Jack found blankets and made a more comfortable space near the fireplace. Claire was exhausted, her body still recovering from the hypothermia. She needed real rest now, not the fitful semi-consciousness she'd maintained through the worst of it. "Sleep," he told her. "I'll keep watch, keep the fire going." "Wake me in an hour," she said. "You need rest too." "I will." It was a lie, but a kind one. He had no intention of sleeping until he was certain she was stable. Claire didn't argue, which told him how exhausted she truly was. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing deep and regular. Jack sat with his back against the wall, watching over her and listening to the storm's last gasps. He thought about the night they'd survived, about how close they'd come to dying in that collapsing lined shack, about the choice to leave and the desperate trek through the blizzard, about finding this cabin just in time, a dozen different moments where things could have gone wrong, where one mistake would have killed them both. But they'd made it. Against odds that should have been impossible, they'd survived. As the first gray light of dawn began filtering through the cabin's small window, Jack allowed himself to relax slightly. They still had challenges ahead, getting Claire to her sister's wedding, finding his horse, dealing with the aftermath of the storm. But those were problems for the living, and right now, being alive felt like the greatest gift imaginable. He added another log to the fire and settled in to wait for sunrise. The rancher had made his choice in that frozen wilderness, and he'd make the same choice again without hesitation. Some things were worth risking everything for, even for a stranger. Especially for a stranger who turned out to be not so strange after all. The storm finally broke just after dawn. Jack stepped outside the cabin into a transformed world. Snow had buried everything under 3 feet of powder, turning the landscape into an endless white canvas. The sky was clearing, patches of blue showing between dissipating clouds. The temperature was still brutally cold, but without the wind it felt almost bearable. He found his horse sheltered in a thick stand of pines about 100 yards from the cabin. Bella was covered in snow and ice, but she was alive, standing with her head down but alert. Jack nearly wept with relief. He led her back to the cabin, talking to her softly the whole way. Claire was awake when he returned, sitting by the fire with a can of beans warming on the propane stove. "Your horse made it? She's tougher than both of us put together." Jack tended to Bella, rubbing her down and giving her water he'd melted. "How are your feet?" "Sore, but I can walk on them. I checked for frostbite. Some minor damage to 2 toes, nothing serious." She smiled. "Looks like I'll be able to dance at the wedding after all." "About that." Jack sat down across from her. "We're about 15 miles from my ranch, maybe 18 from the nearest town. In these conditions, that's a full day's ride even if we'd push hard. There's no way to get you to Helena by 2 o'clock. Claire's face fell, but she nodded. "I figured. I just hoped maybe there was a chance. However," Jack continued, "there's a phone at my ranch. We can call your sister, explain what happened. Maybe she can delay the ceremony a few hours. Jenny will kill me. Jenny will be grateful you're alive." Jack stood and offered his hand. "Ready to ride?" The journey back to the Miller Ranch was slow and exhausting. Bella carried them both gamely, but the deep snow made every step difficult. They had to stop frequently to rest the horse and keep their own circulation going. The sun climbed higher, bringing a little warmth, but also causing the snow to become heavier and wetter. They talked as they rode, sharing stories to pass the time and keep their spirits up. Claire told him about difficult calvings she'd managed, about ornery bulls and horses with personality disorders. Jack shared tales of ranch life, of seasons on the land, of the satisfaction that came from hard work and self-reliance. "You should come by sometime," Claire said. "The practice, I mean. I could check your herd, make sure everyone's healthy." "I might take you up on that." Jack found himself meaning it. "Always good to have a vet's eyes on things. And maybe we can have dinner after." "As payment for saving my life." Jack smiled. "I think that would be a fair trade." It was mid-afternoon when they finally crested the ridge overlooking Miller Ranch. The buildings looked pristine under their blanket of snow, smoke rising from the main house where Jack's ranch hand, Pete, had kept the fire going. Pete came running out when he spotted them, his weathered face showing relief and concern. "Boss, we thought you were dead," Pete called out. "Storm came up so fast." "Almost was," Jack admitted, helping Claire down from the horse. "Pete, this is Claire Watson. She needs to use the phone urgently." Inside the warm ranch house, Claire called her sister. Jack discreetly moved to the kitchen, giving her privacy, but he could hear the conversation. Tears, apologies, explanations, then laughter. Relief. Jenny was postponing the ceremony until evening, giving Claire time to make the drive. All the guests were snowed in at the hotel anyway, she said. It would work out perfectly. Claire hung up and found Jack in the kitchen. "I have to leave within the hour if I'm going to make it. Pete can drive you in my truck. Roads should be mostly clear by now, and he knows how to handle winter driving." "Thank you." Claire stepped closer. "For everything. For saving my life. For getting me to this phone. For not giving up." "You didn't give up either. That counts for a lot." They stood there for a moment, two people who'd survived something extraordinary together. Then Claire leaned in and kissed him, soft and brief but full of meaning. "Dinner," she said when she pulled back. "Next week, my practice, 7 o'clock. I'll be there," Jack promised. An hour later, he watched Pete's truck disappear down the snow-covered road, carrying Claire toward her sister's wedding and back to her own life. Jack returned to his ranch work, checking on the cattle, repairing storm damage, falling back into familiar routines, but something had changed. The loneliness his ex-wife had accused him of didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. He had dinner plans next week with a woman who understood independence and stubbornness, who'd fought alongside him against death and won, who saw him clearly and seemed to like what she saw anyway. As the sun set over the Montana wilderness, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Jack Miller allowed himself to imagine a future slightly different from the solitary one he'd resigned himself to. Maybe Sarah had been wrong about some things. Maybe loving the ranch didn't mean he had to love it alone. The cattle needed feeding, the fence line needed checking, and 100 other tasks demanded his attention. But for just a moment, the rancher stood on his porch and smiled at the mountains, grateful to be alive and surprised to discover he was looking forward to next week with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. If they hadn't stayed close, they would have frozen, but they had stayed close, and in doing so, they'd found something neither of them had been looking for. Sometimes the coldest nights led to the warmest possibilities. Jack understood that now in a way he never had before. He turned and headed back into the house, ready to face whatever came next. The storm had passed, but its gifts remained, and sometimes that was enough to change everything.